The hands moved across the keys like they were remembering a prayer they'd forgotten 40 years ago. Inside Carnegie Hall, 2,000 people sat frozen in their seats, barely breathing. The woman at the piano wasn't supposed to be there. She wasn't on the program. She wasn't wearing an evening gown. Her uniform still had cleaning solution stains on the sleeves. But as her fingers danced through Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 in C minor, something impossible was happening. Maestro Lawrence Whitmore, the most decorated conductor in America, stood in the wings with tears streaming down his face. The same man who just minutes earlier had publicly humiliated this woman. The same man who had called her worthless, who had told her she didn't deserve to even look at a piano. Now he stood there watching his entire worldview shatter with every perfect note. The audience wasn't moving. Some had tears running down their faces. Others sat with their mouths open, unable to process what they were hearing. Because this wasn't just good. This wasn't just technically perfect. This was the kind of playing that happens once in a generation, maybe once in a lifetime. And it was coming from a 68-year-old janitor in a cleaning uniform. But how did we get here? How did this moment become possible to understand that we need to go back to a cold February evening, back to before the applause, before the tears, before everything changed? We need to go back to when Dorothy Williams was just trying to finish her shift. Dorothy Williams had been invisible for 40 years, and she preferred it that way. At 68 years old, she'd perfected the art of moving through spaces without being noticed. Through hotel lobbies where she changed bed sheets, through office buildings where she emptied trash cans, through the elegant backstage corridors of Carnegie Hall where she mopped floors that famous musicians walked on. Every Tuesday and Friday night after her day shift at the Manhattan Grand Hotel ended at 6, Dorothy took the subway to West 57th Street. She'd enter through the service entrance of Carnegie Hall Clock Inn and spend the next 4 hours making sure one of the world's most famous concert venues sparkled for the next day's performances. The pay wasn't much, $17 an hour. But it was steady work. And at her age, steady work was everything. Dorothy had learned a long time ago not to complain, not to ask for more, not to draw attention to herself. She'd learned that survival meant keeping your head down, doing your job, and going home. That was the deal. That was how you made it through. Her apartment in Washington Heights was small, a studio on the 4th floor of a walk-up building with no elevator. But it was hers. Every month she paid her rent on time. She kept it clean. She didn't bother anyone, and no one bothered her. Some of the other cleaning staff talked while they worked, shared stories about their families, their lives, their dreams. Dorothy mostly listened. She'd smile, nod, offer the occasional comment, but she never shared much about herself. Because Dorothy Williams had a past she didn't talk about. A past that felt like it belonged to someone else entirely. A ghost of a girl she used to be. The girl who had dreamed impossible dreams. The girl who had almost made them come true. But that was a lifetime ago. Now Dorothy was just trying to make it to retirement with her dignity intact and enough saved up to cover her final expenses. She didn't want to be a burden to anyone when she died. That was her only remaining goal. Simple. Quiet, invisible. That's what her life had become, and she'd made peace with it. Or so she told herself every single day. February 14th, 2026, Valentine's Day. Carnegie Hall was preparing for one of its biggest events of the year. The International Piano Competition Finals combined with a charity gala benefiting the Juilliard Scholarship Fund. Tickets had sold out in minutes. 2,000 seats. The cheapest going for $500. The premium boxes for $20,000. Dorothy had arrived at 7 p.m. for her shift. The event didn't start until 8:30, which meant she had 90 minutes to clean and prepare the backstage areas, the green rooms, the conductor's suite. She moved efficiently through her checklist. Vacuum the carpets, wipe down the mirrors, stock the bathrooms with fresh towels, refill the water pitchers in the green rooms, check that the conductor's podium was polished to a mirror shine. At 7:45, Dorothy pushed her cleaning cart down the narrow hallway that led to the stage wings. This was always her favorite part of the shift, though she'd never admit it to anyone. The stage itself. Carnegie Hall's main stage was magnificent. From the wings, Dorothy could see the famous auditorium spreading out like a red velvet dream. 5 tiers of balconies, golden acoustic panels, the massive chandelier hanging from the center of the ceiling like a crown of light. And there in the center of the stage, illuminated by a single spotlight, sat the Steinway & Sons concert grand piano. Model D, 9 feet long. Glossy black finish that reflected the stage lights like still water. Dorothy stood in the wings, just out of sight, staring at the piano. She always did this. Every shift. Just for a moment. Just long enough to remember what it felt like to believe in something. Her hands, rough and worn from decades of cleaning chemicals, trembled slightly. She pressed them together the way she always did when the memories got too loud. 40 years since she'd played. 40 years since her fingers had touched piano keys. But standing here looking at that magnificent instrument, Dorothy could still feel the music inside her, like a river that had been dammed up but never stopped flowing. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, then turned away. There was work to do. But as she turned, she didn't notice the man who had just walked onto the stage from the opposite wing. Didn't see him stop and stare in her direction. Maestro Lawrence Whitmore had arrived early, as he always did, before major performances. Lawrence Whitmore was a legend in the classical music world. At 53 years old, he'd conducted with every major orchestra in the world. He'd won 4 Grammy Awards. He'd been featured on the cover of Time magazine. He'd performed for presidents, prime ministers, and kings. He was also known for being difficult, demanding, uncompromising in his standards. Some called him a perfectionist. Others called him something less polite. Lawrence didn't care. Excellence wasn't achieved by being nice. It was achieved by accepting nothing less than perfection. Tonight's event was particularly important to him. The International Piano Competition Finals showcased the best young pianists in the world. Lawrence was serving as head judge and would conduct the orchestra for the final performances. He'd arrived 90 minutes early to inspect the stage test, the acoustics, and mentally prepare. This was his ritual. This was how he maintained his edge. As he walked across the stage toward the piano, he noticed the cleaning woman standing in the wings, staring at his piano. Lawrence stopped, frowned. "Excuse me?" He called out, his voice sharp. "What are you doing?" Dorothy jumped, startled. She turned to see the maestro standing on stage, his arms crossed, his expression irritated. I was just finishing my work, sir," Dorothy said quietly, her eyes downcast. "I'll be out of your way." "You were staring at the piano," Lawrence said, his tone accusatory. "Don't even think about touching it. Do you have any idea how much that instrument is worth? More than you'll make in 10 years, I assure you." Dorothy felt heat rise to her cheeks. Shame. Embarrassment. The familiar feeling of being small. "I wasn't going to touch it, sir," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Lawrence walked closer, his Italian leather shoes clicking on the stage floor. He looked her up and down, taking in her cleaning uniform, her worn sneakers, her hands red and chapped from chemicals. "People like you," he said slowly, deliberately, "don't understand what this instrument represents. This isn't just a piano. This is art. This is culture. This is everything that separates civilization from barbarism." He paused, letting his words sink in. "So do your job, clean what needs to be cleaned, and stay away from things you don't understand." "Is that clear?" Dorothy nodded, not trusting her voice. "I said, is that clear?" Lawrence repeated louder. "Yes, sir," Dorothy whispered. "It's clear." "Good." Lawrence turned away from her, dismissively walking to the piano and running his hand lovingly over its glossy surface. Dorothy grabbed her cleaning cart and hurried away, her face burning. As she disappeared down the hallway, she didn't see Lawrence sit at the piano bench and begin running through scales. Didn't hear him start to play. Didn't know that he was preparing for a performance he believed would be the highlight of the evening. He had no idea that before the night was over, he would be standing on that same stage, tears in his eyes, begging for forgiveness from the woman he'd just humiliated. None of them knew what was coming. But the universe has a way of teaching lessons to those who need them most. To understand who Dorothy Williams became, you need to understand who she was. Harlem, New York. Summer of 1975. Dorothy Jenkins was 8 years old the first time she heard a piano. Her mother, Marie Jenkins, worked 3 jobs to keep them fed and housed in their tiny apartment on 125th Street. Marie cleaned offices in the morning, worked as a home health aide in the afternoon, and took the night shift at a laundromat on weekends. Dorothy spent most of her time alone. She'd learned to cook eggs at age 6, could operate the washing machine at 7, and knew how to forge her mother's signature on school forms by the time she was 8. But she wasn't bitter. She understood her mother was doing everything she could. They had each other, and that was enough. One August afternoon, Dorothy was walking past the Abyssinian Baptist Church on 138th Street when she heard something that stopped her in her tracks. Music, but not like anything she'd ever heard before. Someone was playing the piano inside the church, and the sound poured out through the open doors like liquid gold. Dorothy stood on the sidewalk, frozen, as the melody washed over her. She didn't know what the song was, didn't know anything about classical music, but something inside her recognized it, responded to it, like her soul had been waiting her entire life to hear this sound. Dorothy walked up the church steps and peeked inside. An old man sat at an upright piano near the altar, his eyes closed, his fingers moving across the keys with practiced ease. He was playing for no one, just for himself, just for the music. Dorothy stood in the doorway, transfixed. She didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't want to break whatever spell was holding this moment together. When the song ended, the old man opened his eyes and saw her standing there. "Well, hello there, young lady," he said, his voice warm and kind. "How long have you been standing there?" "I don't know," Dorothy admitted. What was that?" The man smiled. "That was Beethoven. Moonlight Sonata. 3rd movement. You like it? I never heard anything like it," Dorothy said, stepping inside. "It made me feel, I don't know how to explain it." The old man studied her for a moment. Then he gestured to the bench beside him. "Come here, sit down." Dorothy hesitated, then walked over and sat beside him. Up close, she could see his hands, large, weathered with thick calluses on the fingertips. "I'm Henry," he said. "Henry Washington. I've been playing this piano for 43 years, and you are Dorothy Jenkins." "Well, Miss Dorothy Jenkins, have you ever touched a piano before?" Dorothy shook her head. "Would you like to?" Dorothy's eyes went wide. "Really, really?" Henry took Dorothy's small hand and guided it to the keys. He showed her middle C, showed her how to curve her fingers, how to press down with confidence, but not force. "Music isn't about hitting keys," Henry told her. "It's about releasing the sound that's already trapped inside the instrument. You're not making music. You're setting it free." Dorothy pressed the key. The note rang out pure and clear. Something happened in that moment. Something Dorothy couldn't explain then and still couldn't explain now, 59 years later. She felt complete. Like every confused, lonely, scared part of her suddenly made sense. This was what she'd been missing her entire life without knowing it. This was home. For the next 8 years, Dorothy's life revolved around that piano in the Abyssinian Baptist Church. Henry Washington became her teacher, her mentor, her grandfather in everything but blood. 3 times a week after school, Dorothy would run to the church and practice for hours. Henry taught her for free. Said he recognized something in her he'd only seen a handful of times in his entire life. True genius. By age 10, Dorothy was playing Chopin nocturnes. By 12, she'd mastered Beethoven sonatas. By 14, she was tackling Rachmaninoff and Liszt pieces that concert pianists twice her age struggled with. Henry entered her in local competitions. She won every single one. Word spread through New York's classical music community. The Prodigy from Harlem. The girl who played like she was born at the piano. When Dorothy was 16, she received a full scholarship to the Juilliard school. Full tuition, full room and board, everything paid for. Marie Jenkins cried when they got the letter. Cried tears of joy, of pride, of disbelief that her daughter, her baby, was going to one of the most prestigious music schools in the world. "You're going to be somebody," Dorothy Marie said, holding her daughter's face in her hands. "You're going to be someone the world knows." Dorothy started at Juilliard in the fall of 1983. She was 17 years old, and the world felt limitless. Her professors were amazed. Her fellow students were envious. Everyone knew that Dorothy Jenkins was special, that she had something that couldn't be taught, an understanding of music that went beyond technique. She played with soul, with pain, with joy, with everything she'd experienced growing up poor in Harlem, everything she'd learned from Henry, everything she'd poured into the piano during those long afternoons at the church. By her second year, Dorothy was being courted by agents. Concert venues wanted to book her. Record labels wanted to sign her. Everyone wanted a piece of the next great American pianist. Dorothy's future was guaranteed. Certain. Just a matter of time before the world learned her name. And then everything fell apart. It started with a phone call in the middle of the night. March 19th, 1986. Dorothy was 19 years old, finishing her sophomore year at Juilliard. The voice on the phone was a doctor from Harlem Hospital. "Is this Dorothy Jenkins? You're listed as the emergency contact for Marie Jenkins." Dorothy's blood went cold. "What happened?" "Is my mother okay?" A pause. "Too long. Your mother collapsed at work this evening. We've run tests, Miss Jenkins. I'm afraid your mother has advanced stage ovarian cancer. It's very aggressive. We need to discuss treatment options immediately." Advanced stage ovarian cancer. 3 words that destroyed Dorothy's entire world. The doctors gave Marie 3 to 6 months without treatment, maybe 2 years with aggressive chemotherapy and surgery. But the treatment costs were staggering. $200,000, maybe more. Marie worked 3 jobs, but had no health insurance. Medicaid wouldn't cover everything. The hospital offered payment plans, but they still required massive upfront costs. Dorothy was 19 years old, standing in a hospital corridor doing math that didn't work no matter how she calculated it. Her scholarship covered school. That was it. She had maybe $800 in savings. Her mother had nothing. "We'll figure it out," Dorothy told her mother, holding her hand in the hospital bed. "We'll find a way." But there was no way. Not really. Dorothy tried everything. She applied for grants for charity programs for emergency assistance. She called every organization she could find. The answer was always the same. Wait lists, requirements they didn't meet, programs that had run out of funding. Her Juilliard advisor pulled her aside one day. "Dorothy, I know you're going through something difficult," he said carefully, "but you've missed 6 classes this week. You haven't practiced. You're falling behind." "My mother is dying," Dorothy said, her voice flat. "I understand. And I'm sorry, but you have a gift, Dorothy. A once-in-a-generation gift. Your mother would want you to continue, to not throw away this opportunity." Dorothy looked at him. This man who had no idea what it meant to choose between your dreams and your mother's life. "My mother is my life," Dorothy said quietly. "Everything I have, everything I am, exists because she sacrificed for me. She worked 3 jobs so I could have lessons, so I could practice, so I could eat and have a place to sleep. She gave me everything. She stood up her decision already made. Now it's my turn." Dorothy dropped out of Juilliard on April 2nd, 1986. She was 19 years old, and she walked away from her full scholarship without looking back. She got a job as a hotel housekeeper, 40 hours a week. Then she got a second job cleaning offices at night. Then a third job on weekends. She worked 18-hour days, 7 days a week, and gave every penny to her mother's medical care. The Steinway piano Henry Washington had helped her buy with competition winnings. She sold it, got $3,000. It went to hospital bills. Her concert gown, the beautiful black dress she'd planned to wear at her debut recital, sold it. $200. Everything went to keeping her mother alive, to buying her one more day, one more week, one more month. And through it all, Dorothy never touched a piano. Couldn't. It hurt too much. Every note would have been a reminder of everything she'd lost. Marie Jenkins lived for 2 years and 4 months after her diagnosis. She passed away on July 23, 1988. Dorothy was 21 years old. At the funeral, Henry Washington hugged Dorothy and whispered, "Your mother was so proud of you, so proud." Dorothy just nodded. She couldn't speak, couldn't explain that she didn't feel proud. She felt empty. She'd saved her mother's life for a little while, but she'd lost her own in the process, and she would never get it back. After Marie died, Dorothy kept working. What else was she going to do? Go back to Juilliard. She was 21. Her scholarship was gone. She had no money, no way to pay tuition. More than that, she didn't believe she deserved it anymore. The piano had been her gift, her purpose, and she'd walked away from it. In her mind, that meant she'd given up her right to ever return. So Dorothy Williams, who had once been called the most promising pianist of her generation, spent the next 38 years cleaning. She cleaned hotel rooms, she cleaned offices, she cleaned hospitals and schools and apartment buildings. She worked holidays and weekends and double shifts. She lived in small apartments, wore second-hand clothes, and ate modest meals. She saved what little she could and never asked for help from anyone. Some people might call it noble, self-sacrificing. But Dorothy knew the truth. It wasn't noble. It was penance. Every day she spent not playing piano was her punishment for having believed she deserved something more, for having dreamed bigger than her circumstances, for having forgotten even for a moment where she came from. The universe had reminded her that girls like her from places like Harlem didn't get fairy tale endings. They got survival, if they were lucky. So Dorothy survived. She survived through the 90s, through the 2000s, through economic recessions and rent increases, and the slow, grinding reality of working-class life in New York City. She attended funerals for friends who died too young. She watched her neighborhood change, get gentrified, become unrecognizable. She saw the building where she grew up get torn down and replaced with luxury condos. She got older. Her hands developed arthritis. Her back ached from years of bending and lifting. Her knees complained every time she climbed stairs. But she kept working, kept moving, kept surviving. And through it all, every Tuesday and Friday night, she cleaned Carnegie Hall. The cruel irony wasn't lost on her, that she spent her evenings making sure the stage sparkled for pianists who got to live the dream she'd abandoned. Young men and women with talent, yes, but also with resources, with support, with the luxury of pursuing their gifts. Every week, Dorothy would stand in the wings and watch them perform, watch them take for granted what she would have given anything for. It was torture. But it was also the closest she could get to the music without actually playing it herself. This was her life. This was her choice. And she told herself every single day that she was at peace with it. But standing in those wings, watching other people live her dreams, Dorothy Williams knew the truth. She wasn't at peace. She was drowning. And she had been drowning for 40 years. February 14th, 2026, 8:20 p.m. Carnegie Hall's grand tier was filling with New York's elite. Women in designer gowns and glittering jewelry. Men in custom tuxedos. The air thick with expensive perfume and self-importance. The International Piano Competition Finals attracted a specific crowd. The kind of people who collected art and attended galas and donated money to cultural institutions so they could put their names on plaques. They were here to be seen as much as to see. To network, to socialize, to remind each other of their status in the hierarchy of Manhattan's upper class. In the backstage area, Dorothy had finished most of her cleaning checklist. The green rooms were ready. The conductor's suite was spotless. The bathrooms were stocked. She was preparing to leave through the service exit when one of the stage managers stopped her. "Dorothy, hey, we've got a situation. Someone spilled wine in the orchestra section, row D. Can you grab the carpet cleaner and take care of it?" Dorothy checked her watch. 8:22. The performance was scheduled to start in 8 minutes. "Right now?" she asked. "Yeah, sorry, it just happened. Some lady was waving her hands around telling a story and knocked her glass everywhere. It's a mess." Dorothy sighed. "Okay, I'll take care of it." She grabbed the portable carpet cleaner from her supply closet and made her way through the backstage corridors toward the orchestra section entrance. As she pushed through the door into the auditorium, the scale of the venue hit her like it always did. The 5 tiers of balconies rising up toward the ornate ceiling. The sea of red velvet seats now filling with elegantly dressed audience members. And on stage, the Steinway piano waiting under the spotlight. Dorothy made her way down the aisle toward row D. She found the wine spill easily, a large red stain spreading across the expensive carpet. The woman who had spilled it was apologizing profusely to the people around her, her face flushed with embarrassment. Dorothy knelt down with her carpet cleaner and went to work. She was used to being invisible. People rarely noticed the cleaning staff. She might as well have been a ghost. She was halfway through removing the stain when she heard the commotion near the stage entrance, raised voices, someone speaking urgently into a phone, a small crowd of people in formal wear gathering near the wings. Dorothy tried to ignore it. Focus on her work, get the stain out, get back to the service area, clock, out, go home. But the voices were getting louder, more frantic. "What do you mean he can't make it? The paramedic said he needs to go to the hospital. Possible concussion. We have 2,000 people sitting in this auditorium. We have a television broadcast scheduled. We have donors who paid $20,000 for their boxes. We cannot cancel." Dorothy's hands paused on the carpet cleaner. Something was wrong. Backstage chaos. The finalist who was supposed to open the competition, a 23-year-old prodigy from South Korea named Minjun Park, had been in a car accident on the way to Carnegie Hall. His taxi had been rear-ended at an intersection. Minjun wasn't seriously injured, but he'd hit his head, and the paramedics were insisting he go to the hospital for evaluation. Which meant Carnegie Hall had a sold-out audience, a live television broadcast about to start, and no one to perform. Maestro Lawrence Whitmore was furious. "This is completely unacceptable," he said, pacing in the wings like a caged animal. "How does this happen? How does no one have a backup plan?" The competition director, a nervous woman named Patricia Chen, was frantically making phone calls. "We're trying to reach the other finalists, see if anyone can move up their performance time, but most of them are still warming up. They're not mentally prepared to." "Then get them prepared," Lawrence shouted. "This is Carnegie Hall, not a high school recital. These are supposed to be professionals." One of the production assistants ran up. "Maestro, we need to make a decision in the next 3 minutes. The broadcast starts at 8:30. We need to either announce a delay or—" "We are not announcing a delay," Lawrence said coldly. "Do you understand what that would do to this competition's reputation? Do you understand the donors in that audience? Then what do we do?" Lawrence ran his hand through his hair. His jaw clenched. He looked out at the stage, at the piano, sitting there under the spotlight at the audience, settling into their seats, expecting excellence. This was supposed to be perfect. This was supposed to be the performance of the season. And it was falling apart. "Give me a moment," Lawrence said. "I need to think." He walked out onto the stage toward the piano. He needed to clear his head, needed to figure out how to salvage this disaster. As he approached the Steinway, lost in thought, he didn't notice that he wasn't alone on stage. Dorothy had finished cleaning the wine stain. She'd been trying to make her way back to the service exit, but the growing crowd of concerned staff members was blocking the main aisle. So she'd taken the side route through the stage wings, figuring she could cut through to the back hallway. She'd stepped onto the stage just for a moment, just across to the other side. And there it was, the piano, the Steinway, 9 feet of glossy black perfection. Dorothy stopped. She knew she shouldn't, knew she should just keep walking, but something pulled at her, a gravity she'd been fighting for 40 years. She walked closer, close enough to see her reflection in the polished surface, close enough to see the keys immaculate white and black waiting. Her hand reached out, almost unconsciously, her fingers hovering just above middle C. She remembered Henry Washington all those years ago. Music isn't about hitting keys. It's about releasing the sound that's already trapped inside the instrument. Dorothy's finger came down. Middle C, pure and clear, then D, then E. Before she knew what she was doing, her muscle memory took over. The opening notes of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, the piece she'd been working on at Juilliard, the piece she'd never gotten to perform. Just a few notes, just enough to remember what it felt like. The sound filled the empty stage, rich, perfect, haunting. And then a voice shattered the moment. "What do you think you're doing?" Dorothy's hands flew off the keys like she'd been burned. Lawrence Whitmore was striding across the stage toward her, his face twisted with rage. "I asked you a question," he said, his voice cold and sharp. "What are you doing touching that piano? I'm sorry," Dorothy stammered, stepping back. "I was just thought you'd help yourself to a $300,000 instrument. Just thought you'd put your cleaning chemical-covered hands all over it." Dorothy looked down at her hands. They were clean. She always wore gloves when she worked. But she didn't defend herself. Just stood there feeling shame wash over her like ice water. By now, the commotion had attracted attention. Stage managers appeared in the wings. A few audience members in the front rows were craning their necks to see what was happening. Lawrence walked right up to Dorothy, invading her space, his 6-foot frame towering over her. "Do you have any idea what this instrument represents?" he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "This piano has been played by Horowitz, by Rubinstein, by Lang Lang. And you think you have the right to just walk up and touch it?" I said. "I'm sorry," Dorothy whispered, her eyes on the floor. "Sorry. You're sorry." Lawrence laughed, a cruel sound. "Let me explain something to you. This stage, this hall, this piano, these things exist for artists, for people who have dedicated their entire lives to understanding music at the highest level. They are not for... He gestured at her uniform, at her cleaning cart in the wings. "For people like you." The words hung in the air. Sharp. Cutting. Dorothy felt something crack inside her chest. She'd spent 40 years being invisible, being dismissed, being treated as less than. She'd accepted it as the price of her choices. But this felt different. This felt personal. She looked up at Lawrence Whitmore, really looked at him, saw the expensive tuxedo, the designer watch, the casual certainty of someone who had never questioned whether he belonged somewhere. "I understand," Dorothy said quietly. "I'll leave." She turned toward the wings, toward her cleaning cart, toward the service exit, and the life she'd built from the pieces of her broken dreams. But then a voice called out from the front row. "Wait." Everyone on stage turned toward the sound. An elderly man was standing up in the audience. He was at least 80 years old, distinguished-looking, wearing a classic black tuxedo. He was staring at Dorothy with an expression of complete shock. "Wait," he said again, louder this time. "I know you." The elderly man started making his way toward the stage. Security moved to stop him, but he waved them off with the authority of someone who was used to being obeyed. "I'm Professor Emeritus Harold Steinberg," he announced. "I taught at Juilliard for 43 years. I know this woman. I need to speak with her." Lawrence frowned. "Professor, we're dealing with a situation here. If you could please return to that woman." Harold pointed at Dorothy, his voice shaking. "Is Dorothy Jenkins?" Dorothy's blood went cold. Harold made it to the stage stairs and climbed up, moving surprisingly fast for his age. He walked right up to Dorothy, peering at her face. "It is you," he breathed. "Dorothy Jenkins. My God, we all thought you were... What happened to you?" Dorothy couldn't speak, couldn't move. Harold turned to address Lawrence and the growing crowd of onlookers. This woman was a student at Juilliard, 1983 to 86. She was the most talented pianist I encountered in my entire career, and I taught for 43 years. "Do you understand what I'm saying?" The crowd murmured. Lawrence looked skeptical. "She was brilliant," Harold continued. "Absolutely brilliant. We all knew she was going to be one of the greats. And then she just disappeared. Dropped out in her sophomore year. We tried to find her, tried to convince her to come back, but she was gone." He turned back to Dorothy, his eyes shining with tears. "Where have you been, Dorothy? What happened?" Dorothy's throat was tight. "My mother got sick. I had to take care of her. And then she died. And I couldn't go back. I had to work." Harold looked at her uniform, at her worn hands, at the cleaning cart in the wings. Understanding dawned on his face, followed by heartbreak. "Oh, Dorothy," he whispered. Lawrence, who had been watching this exchange with growing impatience, spoke up. "This is a very touching reunion, Professor, but we have a performance starting in minutes. If you could please..." "Do you not understand what I just told you?" Harold turned on Lawrence with unexpected fire. "This woman has more musical talent in her little finger than most of the pianists performing tonight have in their entire bodies." "That's absurd," Lawrence said. "She's been cleaning buildings for decades. Whatever talent she had is long gone. Talent like hers doesn't disappear," Harold shot back. "Then she can prove it." Lawrence's voice was cold, calculated. He turned to Dorothy with a cruel smile. "If Professor Steinberg is correct, if you truly were this prodigy, he claims, then you should be able to play. Right here. Right now." Dorothy shook her head. "No, I can't. I haven't played in 40 years." "Of course you can't." Lawrence said, his tone dripping with satisfaction. "Because the professor is either mistaken or being sentimental. You're a cleaning woman. That's what you are. That's all you've ever been." He turned away from her dismissively, but Harold grabbed Dorothy's arm. "Dorothy," he said urgently, "don't let him do this. Don't let him dismiss you like this. You were extraordinary. You still are." "Harold, I can't." Dorothy said, tears starting to form in her eyes. "It's been too long. I'm not that person anymore." "Yes, you are," Harold insisted. "That person didn't disappear. She's been surviving, sacrificing. But she's still there. I can see her right now looking at that piano the way you used to look at it, like it's the only thing in the world that matters." Lawrence turned back around, his expression mocking. "Well," he said, "are we going to stand here all night listening to stories, or are you going to prove yourself?" The entire backstage area had gone silent. Staff members, performers, musicians from the orchestra, all watching, waiting. And in the front rows, audience members who had heard the commotion were leaning forward, whispers spreading like wildfire through the hall. Dorothy looked at the piano, at Lawrence's smug face, at Harold's pleading eyes. She thought about her mother, about the last thing Marie had said to her before she died. "You sacrificed everything for me, baby. But don't you sacrifice yourself. Don't you forget who you are." Dorothy had forgotten, had buried that girl under 40 years of survival and shame and acceptance, but maybe, just maybe, that girl was still there, waiting, hoping. Dorothy's hands were shaking as she nodded. "I'll play," she said quietly. Lawrence's eyebrows shot up. He clearly hadn't expected her to accept. "You'll play?" He repeated his tone, making it clear what he thought of her chances. "Fine. Then play. Show us this extraordinary talent the professor remembers." He gestured grandly toward the piano. "Show us who you really are." Dorothy walked toward the piano. Every step felt like moving through water. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. Her hands trembled. Her legs felt weak. Behind her, she could hear whispers from the audience. Confusion, curiosity, skepticism. She reached the piano bench and sat down. The Steinway stretched out before her, 9 feet of possibility and terror. Dorothy placed her hands on her lap, trying to still their shaking. She looked at the keys. White, black, perfect, waiting. 40 years. 40 years since she'd sat at a piano like this. 40 years since she'd played for anyone but herself in stolen moments at the church. 40 years since she'd believed she deserved this. Lawrence Whitmore stood to the side, arms crossed, his expression a mixture of amusement and impatience. "Whenever you're ready," he said, his tone making it clear he expected nothing. Dorothy closed her eyes. She thought about Henry Washington teaching her in that church in Harlem. Music isn't about hitting keys. It's about releasing the sound that's already trapped inside the instrument. She thought about her mother working 3 jobs so Dorothy could have lessons. You're going to be somebody, Dorothy. You're going to be someone the world knows. She thought about Juilliard, about the dreams she'd had, about the girl she used to be. And she thought about the last 40 years. Every floor she'd mopped, every toilet she'd cleaned, every night she'd stood in these wings and watched other people live her dream. All of it. All the pain, all the sacrifice, all the loss. It was all in her. Every note of it. Dorothy opened her eyes. She placed her hands on the keys, and she began to play. The first notes were tentative. Dorothy's fingers touched the keys like she was greeting an old friend she hadn't seen in decades. Uncertain. Careful. Testing whether the connection was still there. She was playing Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 in C minor, the piece she'd been working on at Juilliard, the piece she'd never gotten to perform. The opening chords. Slow, powerful, building. At first, Dorothy's playing was mechanical, rusty. Her fingers didn't quite move the way they used to. The arthritis fought against her. The years of not playing created hesitation in her muscle memory. Lawrence Whitmore's expression shifted to barely concealed vindication. See, his face seemed to say, "I told you." In the audience, some people shifted uncomfortably. This was clearly going to be embarrassing. But then something happened. As Dorothy continued playing, something began to shift. Her fingers started to remember. Not in her mind, not consciously, but in her body, in the deep muscle memory that 40 years couldn't completely erase. The hesitation began to fade. The notes started to flow, and Dorothy began to feel it, that old familiar feeling, like coming home after a lifetime of being lost. The music started to take shape. The tentative opening gave way to the first theme, those haunting, beautiful chords that Rachmaninoff had crafted to speak directly to the human soul. Dorothy's hands moved with increasing confidence. The arthritis didn't matter. The years didn't matter. Nothing mattered except the music. She could feel it now. The river that had been dammed up inside her for 40 years. All that emotion, all that pain, all that sacrifice. It was pouring out through her fingers, through the piano, into the air of Carnegie Hall, and people were starting to notice. The first movement of Rachmaninoff's Second Piano Concerto is a journey. It starts with those powerful opening chords, then moves into a melody that is at once heartbreaking and hopeful. It speaks of loss and longing, of dreams deferred, of beauty found in unexpected places. It was the perfect piece for this moment. Dorothy's playing grew stronger, more confident. The technical ability was returning, yes, but more than that, something else was emerging. Soul. Every note Dorothy played was infused with the weight of her life. Every phrase carried the story of 40 years of sacrifice. Every crescendo held the accumulated grief of dreams abandoned. But there was also something else in her playing, something unexpected. Joy. Because for the first time in 40 years, Dorothy was doing what she was born to do. For the first time since she was 19 years old, she was completely, fully herself. And it was extraordinary. In the audience, people stopped shifting, stopped whispering. One by one, they sat up straighter, leaned forward, captivated by what they were hearing. This wasn't just good playing. This was something else entirely. Backstage, the performers who had been preparing for the competition stood frozen in the wings listening. Some of them had tears in their eyes. Professor Harold Steinberg sat in the front row, with his hands clasped together, tears streaming down his face. He'd been right. The talent was still there, stronger than ever. And on stage, Lawrence Whitmore's expression had transformed completely. The smugness was gone. The certainty was gone. In its place was something that looked like shock, like awe, like the sudden devastating realization that he had been completely, utterly wrong. He watched Dorothy's hands move across the keys, watched her face serene, now lost in the music, watched as she played with a level of emotional depth that he, despite all his training and success, couldn't fully comprehend. This was what music was supposed to be. Not technical perfection for its own sake, not showing off, not proving superiority. This was music as language, as prayer, as the expression of a human soul laid bare. Lawrence felt something he hadn't felt in years: humility. Dorothy moved into the second theme of the first movement. The melody soared, reaching heights that seemed impossible. The piano sang under her hands, notes cascaded like water, like light, like tears. The audience was completely silent now. 2,000 people holding their breath. Some were crying. They didn't know why, didn't know Dorothy's story, but they could hear it in her playing, could feel the weight of it, the pain of sacrifice, the beauty of love, the cost of survival. It was all there in the music. Dorothy had entered that place that all great musicians know. That transcendent space where you're not thinking about the notes anymore, where your conscious mind steps back and something else takes over, something deeper, something true. She was in conversation with the piano now, with Rachmaninoff across the years, with her younger self, with her mother, with everyone she'd lost and everything she'd sacrificed. The first movement moved toward its climax. The chords grew larger, more powerful. The complexity increased. Fast runs, massive chord progressions, technical demands that would challenge even the most accomplished concert pianists. Dorothy's hands flew across the keys. No hesitation now. No doubt. Just pure channeled emotion transformed into sound. The music built and built, layers upon layers of melody and harmony. The piano seemed to expand, to fill every inch of Carnegie Hall with its voice. And Dorothy played it all. Every note, every nuance, every impossible passage. She played with technique that 40 years of not playing shouldn't have allowed. But more than that, she played with wisdom, with the understanding that only comes from a life fully lived, from joy experienced and lost, from dreams abandoned and somehow impossibly reclaimed. The climax of the first movement approached. The massive, overwhelming culmination of all the themes. The moment where everything comes together in a rush of sound and emotion. Dorothy's entire body was engaged now. Her hands, her arms, her shoulders, her core. Every part of her channeling the music. The final chords of the movement. Powerful. Definitive. Triumphant. Dorothy's hands came down on the keys with all the weight of 40 years of silence. The sound exploded through the hall. Rich, full, perfect. And then it ended. The final note rang out, sustaining, slowly fading into silence. Dorothy sat at the piano, her hands still on the keys, her eyes closed, her chest heaving. She had just played one movement, about 12 minutes of music. There were 2 more movements to the concerto. But she was done. She'd said what she needed to say. She opened her eyes and looked out at the audience. 2,000 people sat in absolute silence. No one moved. No one spoke. No one seemed to breathe. It was the kind of silence that only follows something profound, something that has shifted the very air in a room. Dorothy stood up slowly. Her legs were shaking. She turned toward the wings, toward her cleaning cart, toward the exit. And then someone started clapping. It was Harold Steinberg, standing in the front row, applauding. Then another person joined him. Then another. Within seconds, the entire auditorium was on its feet. 2,000 people. Standing ovation. The sound was deafening. Applause rolled through the hall like thunder. People were cheering, crying, shouting. Dorothy stood on stage stunned. She'd never performed for an audience this large, had never received a standing ovation, had never experienced anything like this. She didn't know what to do, didn't know how to process it. And then she saw Lawrence Whitmore. He was walking toward her across the stage. His face was wet with tears. His expression was one of complete devastation. He stopped in front of her. And then, in front of 2,000 people, Maestro Lawrence Whitmore, one of the most decorated conductors in America, dropped to his knees. Lawrence Whitmore knelt before Dorothy Williams with tears streaming down his face. The applause continued, but Lawrence seemed oblivious to it. He looked up at Dorothy with an expression of raw, genuine emotion that seemed completely at odds with the arrogant man from earlier. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry." Dorothy stared down at him, not sure what to say, not sure what to feel. "I was wrong," Lawrence continued. "About you, about music, about everything." He stood up slowly but didn't move away, didn't try to reclaim his space or his dignity. He just stood there exposed in his shame. "I have spent my entire life," he said loud enough for the people nearby to hear, "believing that music belonged to people like me, people with training, with pedigree, with the right credentials. I thought that's what separated art from noise, standards, gatekeeping." He gestured to Dorothy. "But what you just did, that wasn't about training. That wasn't about credentials. That was truth. That was what music is supposed to be." The applause had started to die down. People wanted to hear this, wanted to witness this moment. Lawrence turned to face the audience. "This woman," he said, his voice carrying through the hall, "has more understanding of music in her soul than I have learned in 30 years of conducting. She has played one movement of a concerto after 40 years away from the piano, and it was the most profound performance I have ever witnessed." He turned back to Dorothy. "I judged you based on your appearance, based on your circumstances. I dismissed you as unworthy without knowing anything about you. And in doing so, I became everything that is wrong with classical music, everything that is wrong with art, everything that is wrong with how we value human beings." Lawrence's voice broke again. "I am deeply, truly sorry. And I know that my apology doesn't undo the harm, doesn't give you back what you lost. But I want you to know that what you did tonight, you reminded me why I fell in love with music in the first place." The silence in Carnegie Hall was profound. Dorothy looked at this man, this powerful man, who had humiliated her, who was now humiliated himself. She could see his pain was genuine, could see that something fundamental had shifted in him. She could have savored his shame, could have made him suffer the way he'd made her suffer. But Dorothy Williams had spent 40 years learning that holding on to anger just made you tired. "Thank you for your apology," she said quietly. "I accept it." Lawrence nodded, unable to speak. Dorothy started to turn away, but Harold Steinberg was suddenly on stage, gripping her hands. "Dorothy, don't leave," he said urgently. "This is your moment. You can come back. You can perform again. I'll help you. The school will help you. You can have the career you were meant to have." Other people were moving toward the stage now. Concert promoters, agents, people with business cards and opportunities and promises. "Ms. Williams, I represent Carnegie Hall. We'd like to book you for a full recital." "Ms. Williams, I'm with Columbia Records. We need to talk about a recording contract. Ms. Williams, I run a classical music festival in Europe. Would you consider?" Dorothy held up her hand, and everyone fell silent. Dorothy looked at all these people. These successful, wealthy, powerful people who suddenly wanted a piece of her. 24 hours ago, she was invisible. She was the cleaning woman. She was nobody. Now she was somebody. Now they saw her. But only because she'd proven herself worthy. Only because she'd performed for them. Dorothy understood something in that moment that she wasn't sure any of them would ever understand. "I appreciate all of your offers," she said. "I truly do, but I'm not interested." Confusion rippled through the crowd. "You don't understand," Harold said. "Dorothy, this is your chance. Everything you gave up, you can have it back. You can have the career you deserved." Dorothy smiled sadly. "Harold, I gave up that career 40 years ago because I loved my mother more than I loved music, and I would make the same choice again every single time." She looked out at the audience, at all those faces staring at her with curiosity and admiration. "I didn't play tonight to prove I was good enough for you," Dorothy said, her voice carrying through the hall with quiet strength. "I played because that man," she gestured to Lawrence, "made me remember something I'd forgotten. He made me remember that I am not defined by my circumstances, that the girl who loved music didn't die. She just learned how to carry loss." Dorothy's eyes shone with tears, but her voice remained steady. "Music doesn't belong in concert halls. It doesn't belong to people with the right credentials or the right opportunities. Music belongs to anyone who needs it, anyone who loves it, anyone who carries it in their soul." She looked at her hands, worn, scarred, beautiful. "For 40 years, I thought I lost my right to music because I walked away from it. But music was never something I did. It was something I am. And tonight I remembered that." She turned to Harold. "Thank you for believing in me, for remembering me. But I don't need to be on stage to be complete. I don't need applause to matter. I did this for me, for my mother, for the girl I used to be." Dorothy started walking toward the wings. "Ms. Williams, wait," someone called out. "Don't you want something? Money, recognition, anything?" Dorothy paused and turned back. "I already got what I needed," she said simply. "I got to play again. That's enough." And with that, Dorothy Williams walked off the stage of Carnegie Hall, past her cleaning cart, through the service corridors, and out into the cold February night. Behind her, 2,000 people sat in stunned silence, processing what they'd just witnessed. Not just a performance, but a lesson about judgment, about worth, about what truly matters. Maestro Lawrence Whitmore stood on that stage long after Dorothy had gone, staring at the piano, tears still wet on his face. He would never forget this night, would never forget the woman he'd dismissed, would never forget the way her hands moved across those keys. And he would spend the rest of his career trying to become worthy of the lesson she'd taught him. 3 days later, the video had gone viral. Someone in the audience had recorded Dorothy's performance on their phone. They'd posted it to social media with the caption, "Janitor plays piano at Carnegie Hall and stuns everyone." Within hours, it had 1 million views. By the next day, 10 million. News outlets picked it up. The janitor who silenced Carnegie Hall. Cleaning woman. Stuns elite audience. Hidden genius discovered after 40 years. Dorothy's phone started ringing. She didn't answer it. She didn't want to talk to reporters or producers or anyone else who wanted to turn her moment into their story. She went to work. Back to the Manhattan Grand Hotel. Back to cleaning rooms and changing sheets. Her co-workers had seen the video. They congratulated her, asked her questions, told her she was famous. Dorothy just smiled and said, "It's not that big a deal." But at night, when she was alone in her studio apartment, Dorothy would sit on her bed and think about what had happened. She'd played. After 40 years she'd played, and it had felt like breathing after being underwater her entire life. She didn't regret turning down the offers, didn't regret walking away from the opportunities, because Dorothy had learned something that night that no career could have taught her. Her worth wasn't determined by applause. Her value wasn't measured by success. Her identity wasn't defined by what she did for a living. She was Dorothy Williams, daughter of Marie Jenkins, student of Henry Washington, lover of music, survivor. And that was enough. 6 months later. Tuesday night. Dorothy's shift at Carnegie Hall. She'd kept the job. Despite everything. Despite the offers, despite the fame, despite people recognizing her now, she kept cleaning, kept working, kept showing up. Some people thought it was sad, thought she should have taken the opportunities, thought she was wasting her second chance. But Dorothy understood something they didn't. She wasn't wasting anything. She was living on her own terms, making her own choices, not being pushed by other people's expectations. At 9 p.m., after the evening's performance had ended and the audience had left, Dorothy pushed her cart through the backstage corridors. She made her way to the stage. The Steinway piano sat there as always under the spotlight. Dorothy walked over to it. She looked at the keys, at her reflection in the glossy black surface. And then she sat down. She played for 15 minutes. Chopin, Beethoven, Rachmaninoff. The pieces she loved. She played for herself, for her mother, for Henry Washington, for the girl she used to be and the woman she'd become. No audience, no pressure, no judgment, just Dorothy and the music. When she finished, she stood up, ran her hand gently over the piano's surface. "Thank you," she whispered. Then she grabbed her cleaning cart and continued her shift. Because this was Dorothy's life. Cleaning by day, playing by night, finding beauty in both. She was exactly where she needed to be, living on her own terms, making her own music, and that was everything.